So we're continuing tonight with our series talking about weariness. And if you remember last night, we heard about the life of Elijah. We saw how even in his victory, he experienced weariness. He experienced tiredness and how that affected him. And today we're going to move to another person in the Old Testament, a little bit before the life of Elijah. And it's found in the book of Ruth. If you have your Bible, I'm going to turn there. We're going to be looking at the book of Ruth tonight. I'll also have the scriptures up on the screen. But we're not talking necessarily about Ruth. We're looking at Naomi. So maybe you know the story of Ruth. You know kind of what she did and things like that. But have you ever stopped and looked at Naomi? Naomi was her mother-in-law. And if you look at her life, you see how hard it truly was. So to give you a little bit of a background, Naomi was married to her husband Elimelech. They had 2 sons, and they lived during the times of the judges. And there was a famine that happened in the land, and so they were in need. There was a lot of food, and they decided to leave their home in Bethlehem and go to Moab. So they go there, and while they're there, Naomi's husband passes away, and her sons marry Moabite women. And then within that 10 years that they're there, her sons also die. And so understand, like, whenever they left, she had her husband, she had their sons. This is significant because whenever you're a woman in that culture, you need a man around. That's just how it was. Like, when women couldn't go out, they couldn't buy things, they couldn't own land, they couldn't, they didn't have all of those opportunities. And so they needed their husband. And then if they didn't have their husband, then they had to have their son or someone that was there that could help take care of them, to give them just a little bit of solid foot. And so while she was there, both her husband and her sons died. And in the midst of this, she hears that back in Judah, things were getting a little bit better. And so she decides to return. And so she's going back, and she's on the road, and she's about to go on the road to Judah, and she turns to her daughter-in-laws who are there with her, and she tells them, you know what, return to your home. You don't need to be with me. Go back to your families. Maybe they'll be able to take care of you. Maybe you'll find a husband. I'm not where you want to be. So she insisted that they returned to their parents, that they returned to their home so that she could go back alone. Can I tell you that Naomi faced trials? She faced hardships. She faced struggles. She came to a point where she was hopeless, where she felt like she had nowhere to turn. And this is where we see her problem. This is the problem that she faced. And so this is what happened. Whenever she returns, she gets back, and this is where we're starting in Ruth 1, starting in verse 19. This is what it reads. It says, so the 2 women went on until they came to Bethlehem. Understand that Ruth had decided, if you don't remember the story, Ruth had said, no, I'm going to go with you. I'm going to go with you. I'm not going to go home. I'm going to go with you back to Judah, and I will be with you. And so they came back. They went to Bethlehem, and when they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the women exclaimed, can this be Naomi? The people there, they saw them coming. The women, they remembered her. It had been over 10 years, but they saw her in the distance like, she's coming back. Is this Naomi? They were excited to see her. And Naomi responds, and she says, don't call me Naomi, she told them. Call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi? The Lord has afflicted me. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me. Understand, she says she left full. There might have been a famine. There might not have been a lot of food, but she had her family. She had those closest to her. She left full, but she was coming back empty. She was coming back with nothing. Just that hollowness inside. And understand, her name, Naomi, actually meant pleasantness or agreeable. A name back then, that was like the badge. That was like what defined them. And so when they saw Naomi, they had this idea of just pleasantness. That's what they thought of her as. That's how they remembered her as pleasant, agreeable, good. And she's like, you know what? That's not me anymore. That's not me. Now I'm Mara. Mara meant bitter. All her agreeableness, all of her pleasantness was gone because bitter had set in her weariness. And that brings me to my first idea, is that living in weariness will make us bitter. Living in weariness will make us bitter. Job, you know the story of Job and everything that he lost. In Job 10:1, he says, "My soul is weary of my life. I will leave my complaint upon myself. I will speak in the bitterness of my soul." His soul had grown so weary because of the struggle and everything he had lost, that bitterness had set into his heart, and he was struggling. You know, there was a professor of psychiatry at Harvard, and he had studied Sigmund Freud. You knew him, and you know who Sigmund Freud is. He died at the age of 83, and he described him as a bitter and disillusioned man. He said, tragically, one of the most influential thinkers of our time had little compassion for the common person. Freud had written in 1918, he said, "I have found little that is good about human beings on the whole. In my experience, most of them are trash, no matter whether they publicly subscribe to this or that ethical doctrine or none at all." Freud had become weary. He had become bitter, and he died friendless. His end was bitter. Hebrews 12:15 says, "See to it that no one falls short of the grace of God, and that no bitter root grows up to cause trouble and defile many." That bitterness, whenever we get weary and we get downtrodden and we go through these things, this bitterness slowly starts to take hold and grows within us. According to one pastor, he says, "Bitterness erodes optimism, shatters joy, and kills our ability to love others." When that bitterness takes hold, it begins to destroy us from the inside. Naomi had given up hope. She was left joyless and unmotivated because the weariness had set in and the bitterness was taking root. Understand that when we find that bitterness taking root in our spirit, it may be that it's planted in that soil of weariness. When we begin to experience bitterness, when we begin to look at life in a negative way and we can't find the joy or the peace, and maybe that weariness has been setting in for a long time. Secondly, I find that troubles and trials may not remove our faith in God, but it may remove our faith in his goodness. We may still believe in God. We may still say, "Oh, well, he's good," but we don't really expect that he's good. When we look at verse 11, this is what Naomi said. She told her daughter-in-laws to return home. Ruth is saying, "No, I want to go with you." This is what Naomi says. She says, "Return home, my daughters. Why would you come with me? Am I going to have any more sons who could become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. I am too old to have another husband. Even if I thought there was still hope for me, even if I had a husband tonight and then gave birth to sons, would you wait until they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters, it is more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has gone out against me." She knew God. She knew of his goodness, but she looked at her situation and she said, "His hand has gone out against me." She said, "Even if I thought there was hope for me." Understand, she didn't think there was any hope. She had given up. Her hope was gone. She's telling her daughter-in-laws, "Don't even bother. There's no hope for me, but there's still hope for you. There is still a God out there. So it's okay. It's just, you know what? For me, well, I'm done." You know, there was a time several months ago at work, and there was one of my coworkers, we were talking, and she said I don't remember, it was her daughter or daughter-in-law or someone, and they had this concerning medical issue, and they were going to get tests over the weekend, and she was concerned, so she asked me to pray and stuff, and so I prayed over the weekend, and the week rolled around, and the following week I was sitting there, and honestly, I was like, I kind of didn't want to ask how the test went. Because in my mind, like in my heart, I wasn't expecting a good report. Honestly, I was just like, you know what? I've seen the struggles, like I've seen all of these things, and I'm just like I didn't have a lot of hope. And I asked her, and she's like, "Oh, they came back good. She's fine." And I was surprised. Not because I doubted God, not because I thought, well, he's not listening, he's not there, but you know, sometimes when things just continue to go down and you experience struggle after struggle, you don't even realize it. You're surprised when God shows up and he does something miraculous. we get weary and we say, you know what? I know what God's word says. I know he's good. But in our heart, we don't expect him to do those good things for us. We don't expect to see them. And one more thing that I thought about as I was thinking about this story, and I thought about Naomi and how being out there and losing her husband, losing her sons, and as a parent, especially as a mother, like a lot of the things that we do is for our kids. A lot of the choices that we make and just our focus a lot of time is on our kids. And that's why we see a lot of empty nest. When our kids graduate and they move out and suddenly the home's empty, and then it's like, man, what am I going to do now? Eric, he talks about that. Faith has left. Sophia's going to be leaving soon, and Eric's always like, man, who am I going to take care of? Like, hello, me? I'm still here, He can do that. But we get so wrapped up in these things that sometimes our life begins to become unbalanced. It says there's times when we do the right things and the intentions are good, but they get unbalanced. And then when those things are gone, we're left going, wait, now what? One of the things that I've told myself all along, whenever I first started in ministry, we started a youth group. And we were at a church. Faith was going into the 6th grade. I wanted her to have a youth group. There was no other youth at the church. And so I prayed about it. I sought God, and I felt like he was saying, go forward. And so that's what I did. We started a youth group, God opened the door, and, he's taking us through all of these things. But can I tell you, in all of these things, whenever stuff gets hard, and whenever I look at my kids and I think about, how hard it is for them, because it is hard for them to be a pastor's kid. It's hard for them, not just in the pressures. I would say sometimes it's pressures from the church. I'm thankful for our church, but they have to be at service every time. They have to be there early, lastly. That's what they say, and that there's also a spiritual attack. And every time it gets hard and I look at them and I see what it's doing, what I would tell myself is the best place I can be for them is in God's will. The best place I can be for them is in God's will. And it caused me to seek God more. It caused me to find out what he wants more. But then, guess what? Sophia's getting ready to leave. They're growing up. They're leaving the house. They're building their own lives. And so now whenever things get hard and difficult, well then, where do I find my motivation? Is it because I'm going to God because I want to know his will for me? Because it is best for me too? The intentions are good, and that's a good reason to seek God because you want to be that example for your kids and stuff like that, but that can't be your only reason. That can't be your primary motivator. You have to keep that balance. What do you do when the object of your inspiration and your dedication is gone? We have to continue to seek God. We have to continue to recognize God's goodness and to seek him. And that brings us to Naomi's solution. We see her problem, we see her struggle, we see what she faced, and the hardship and the heartache. But there's solution in this as well. One thing is because Naomi has sown into others, they were there to help her through the weariness. Do you see that? She had sown into others. She had sown into Ruth. She told Ruth to leave. It probably would have been better for Ruth, in logical terms, to go back to her family. But she knew Naomi. She knew Naomi's heart. And this is what she said. If we look at verse 16, there in chapter 1, this is Ruth's devotion. This is her response. It says, but Ruth replied, don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if anything but death separates you and me. The devotion that Ruth had to Naomi. So that whenever Naomi was struggling, whenever life got hard, Ruth could say, but I'm still going to be there for you. Because Naomi had poured into her. So she was there for her. And then you see her determination. In chapter 2, verse 2, it says, and Ruth the Moabitess said to Naomi, let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favor. And Naomi said to her, "Go ahead, my daughter." I mean, Naomi wasn't getting out there. Naomi wasn't directing her. Naomi wasn't helping her. I think Naomi was in a point of weariness and despair and just trying to survive. And Ruth's like, "You know what? Let me do this. Let me do this." And then it continues on. In verse 5, it says, "And Boaz asked the foreman of his harvester, 'Whose young woman is that?' He goes and he sees her out there. He doesn't recognize her. And he's like, 'Who is that?' And the foreman replied, 'She is the Moabitess who came back from Moab with Naomi.' She said, 'Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the harvesters.' She went into the field and has worked steadily from morning till now, except for a short rest in the shelter." Ruth was devoted to Naomi, and she was determined. She was determined to help her. Understand that when God pours into us, we have to pour it back out into others. When God is pouring into your life, you have to let that overflow into those that are around you, to those who need encouragement, because we all have those times when we struggle. We all have those times when we feel weary. And it's those people that are around us that we poured into that are there to help us through that. You know, I don't know if y'all know much about the Dead Sea. You have the Jordan River, and it goes through the Sea of Galilee, and it goes all the way down to the Dead Sea. And it's called the Dead Sea because there's really nothing alive in it. It's so salty. It's 10 times saltier than the ocean. Because what happens is the water runs down into it, and it's below sea level, and so there's no place for the water to go. It doesn't flow out. It just sits there. The only way water gets out is whenever it evaporates, and what that leaves behind is the salt. And so you get this massive body of water that nothing can really live in because there's no flow through it. I tell you, that's us in our spiritual life. Whenever we're filled, if we just take it and we just get what we get from God and we're like, yes, this is great, but we're not letting it flow through us to others, then it just brings death. It begins to die. Because God's Spirit and His blessing is designed to flow through us to those that are around us. We have to let it flow through us. Otherwise, it just goes stagnant. We have to sow into others. And that's what Ruth did. After Naomi has sowed into her, she came back and she said, "Now let me be a blessing to you. Now let me be there for you." And they lifted each other up. That's what the church is for. That we can lift each other up, that we can experience God and let it overflow to those that are around us. Secondly, understand that how you perceive a situation will determine how you handle it. How you perceive a situation will determine how you handle it. Naomi had given up because she was focused on everything she had lost. She came back empty. That's what she said. Everything was gone. She had nothing. Well, I mean, I can see that. Well, let me give you a pretty relevant example. Let's think about this last week. Understand there's people in this country who are feeling relief, who are celebrating, who have a positive outlook that they haven't had in a while. They're excited. But then there's others who are mourning, who are crying, who think the end is here. The same situation. The same president that got elected, but yet one group is excited and hopeful, and another group has lost hope because they see it very differently. Same situation, but viewed two very different ways. How we view a situation will determine how we handle it, will determine how it affects us. There was a woman who worked with Mother Teresa. Her name was Eileen Egan. She worked with her for 30 years. And there was a point when Mother Teresa, this is what she said. She said, everything is a problem. Things happen. Struggles come in. She's like, everything's a problem. But instead of using that word problem, she said, why not use the word gift? Literally, substitute gift for problem. And come on, I don't know about that. I don't know if that changes anything. But that's what they did. They said, we're going to start substituting the word gift instead of saying problem. And it wasn't long after they had this long flight, and it was changed, and there was a long layover. And so she went to her, and she said, Mother, I have to tell you about a gift. She said, we have to wait here for 4 hours, and you won't arrive at the convent until very late. She said, so Mother Teresa got out her favorite book, And she started to read. And she said, from that time on, items that presented disappointments or difficulties would be introduced with, we have a small gift here. Or, today we have an exceptionally big gift. Sometimes we have those especially big gifts. And we struggle. Because we recognize them or we acknowledge them as problems when really they could be a gift from God. So what was Naomi's gifts here? I mean, we look at her situation and it's like, man, I don't know what could be good for her. She lost it all. What a struggle. We see it in chapter 4, right towards the end. Starting in verse 13, it says, so Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife, and then he went to her, and the Lord enabled her to conceive. And she gave birth to a son. The women, those women who had recognized her when she came in, those women who had said, look, it's Naomi. She's like, no, it's Mara now. These women, they said to Naomi, they said, praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a kinsman redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age, for your daughter-in-law, who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons, has given him birth. Then Naomi took the child, laid him in her lap, and cared for him. The women living there said, Naomi has a son, and they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. You know, I won't go into it, but it's just interesting. I have it underlined that they called him a kinsman redeemer. It's a little foreshadow there. Jesus. And understand that when we read that Obed was the father of Jesse, who was the father of David, and so understand that he's in the lineage. He is the ancestor of Jesus. This daughter-in-law, who she tried to turn away, who she tried to just go back because she had no hope. This daughter-in-law came in and gave her what they said was better than 7 sons. Because Naomi was taken care of. She would continue to be taken care of. And she would be known in the Bible as the mother-in-law of Ruth. In the lineage of Jesus. That was her gift. She came back feeling worn out and hopeless because she didn't understand God's complete picture. We don't always know God's plan. We don't always know his purpose. But we're called to walk in faith. We're called to trust in him. Romans 8:28, we just went through Romans, but this is what it says. It says, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. How do you know if you've been called according to his purpose? Well, if you've accepted him as your Savior, then you are called according to his purpose, and then we can trust that he's going to work out all of those hard things in our life for our good. We can trust that they will truly be good. Because here's what happens sometimes, is we're like, well, I mean, you know, God's going to work it out for my good, but really I'd prefer it to do this. You know, my way would actually be kind of better, but I'm not going to tell God that, but that's kind of what I feel in my heart, you know. You know, when we have kids, they don't like it when we make certain decisions. We know it's for their own good, but they're not very happy with it because they think, you know what I want to do, that would actually be better than whatever you're giving me. As adults, we're not much different. We think that what God's giving us probably isn't quite as good as what we want. But we have to trust that God's gifts are good. We have to actually trust that they're better than what we originally wanted. His gifts are truly better than what we think are good. Matthew 7:11, it says, if you then, though you are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good gifts to those who ask him? If we want to bless our kids, if we want to give them good things, how much more is God going to give those good things to us? But do we truly believe that? Do we truly trust that? Do we truly look and recognize that good is coming? Victory is coming. We may not know what it looks like. We might not know when it's coming, but understand that when it gets here, we will recognize it. It won't be this thing that comes and later back is like, oh, I guess that was it. I guess that was the good thing that happened out about this. No, whenever it comes, we will recognize it. We'll be like, wow, God, this is what you did. Wow, God, this is so much better than what I wanted. This is so much better than what I could have imagined. That's what the Word of God says. That it's better than what we want. It's not, it's still good. No, it's better. So let's trust that. Let's believe that. Let's live a life that says that. And whenever we're weary, whenever things keep coming our way and they start to pound us down, let us trust in God's goodness. That's what we sang about, worship team. And I have y'all come back up. That's what we're going to sing about again. It says, all my life you have been faithful. All my life you have been so, so good. All my life, God, you've been there. Whenever I turned my back on you, you were still there calling me. You were still there protecting me. As I follow you now and those things come in that disappoint me, I understand that you are doing good through it. And even if it's not tomorrow, I know that good is coming. I know that good will be there and it'll be better than what I can imagine. Let's stand and let's sing that one more time this evening. Let's worship him and recognize him for his goodness.
Oh, I will sing of the goodness of God.